Councillor Reynolds, Michael Scott, Joe Britton, Claire Whiting, who will be late, Laura R. Scott, Christabel Cousins, who Claire is standing in for.
Okay, thanks, Andy. And then has everybody got a copy of the minutes of the last meeting, which was 16th of September? I'm not going to dwell on these.
18th of November, Jill.
Sorry, I was looking at the
November.
18th of November, apologies. Anything to report on the school's funding formula? I don't think there's anything, any issues anybody wants to raise?
We're coming up again in this meeting as well, because we're doing updates.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that one unless anybody's got some issues. We then looked at the lovely issues of dedelegation, went through that, and there were various votes around dedelegation. Anybody want to raise anything under that? I think that was fairly straightforward. And we looked at the funding for school improvement services, and that's on the agenda as well. And we finally looked at just some of the implications of national funding formula, school funding into the future. And I don't think we've got anything to add to that. Anybody got anything they'd like to add to the minutes? No? Okay, lovely, thank you. So, Tim, you are on with school funding 22-23, please.
Okay. So last meeting we talked about the principles, what we're going to do. The timetable for schools funding is always a bit spread out because we get initial allocations or idea of what the government's going to do in the summer. It's only when the government incorporates the October census data and then sends details back to us that we actually have the cash amounts, and that comes in just before Christmas. So it's the usual pattern of this time. So we had details of DSG, but alongside that, which is something that's different this year, we also had details of a supplementary grant in addition to DSG for schools, which comes out of the Health and Social Care Levy, and it is quite substantial. So for Telford Wrekin mainstream schools, it's around £4 million. That's about 2.8%, but that's money over and above what's in our funding formula. So obviously, from school's point of view, that's pretty good news. So if we go on to our funding formula, so the pupil numbers that came out were more or less what we expected. What Andy does most years now, he asks you guys, schools, what your numbers are around October, so we can model our formula as closely as possible to the final results, and it normally comes out pretty similar, and again that is the case this year. So we've got about amount of money we will get. What has happened though is you'll be aware, if you've been on the forum a while, that for the last few years we aim to match the government's national funding formula as closely as possible, and every year we say to you that the caveat is it's sometimes we can give a bit more than the government's formula, sometimes a bit less, and that's usually around timing differences. There's one set of data that's used to measure the money that goes to schools and a slightly different time set of data used to work out the money we get to give to schools. So last year it worked out that we were able to give schools a bit more than the national funding formula because of that. This year it's ended up a bit less. And in addition to that, we talked last time about growth funding for schools. So you'll be aware that there's a lot of growth in the secondary sector for Telford Wrekin, and probably will be for another couple of years. And as a result of that, we are funding growth in those schools by funding on estimated numbers. We get growth funding from the government, but when we looked at the initial figures last term, we thought we'd spend a bit more on growth than we're getting. And we did amend the way we fund growth because of that. So we were a bit less generous now. So we used to fund all growth in schools once they were in estimated numbers. And now we're just funding growth that's been explicitly agreed with the LA. That normally means the entry year, so year 7 for secondary schools, reception for primary schools. But there can be occasions when the LA will ask schools to take pupils over above the PAN in other year groups as well. So we agreed we'd fund that, but we wouldn't fund general growth in schools. So that reduced the cost a little bit. But even with that, we are going to spend a bit more on growth than we get in terms of the allocation from government. So the net result of those two things, the timing differences and growth, is that this year, the local funding formula for schools, our factors will be a bit less, than the NFF factors. And you can see that in the paper that's presented to the forum. So we've got 3 columns of figures, firstly for primary, then for secondary. So the first column shows the amounts per funding factor in the current year, 21-22. Second column shows the national funding formula figures. So this is the government sort of funding formula. And then the third one is what we're actually going to fund schools on in the year. And you can see column 3, whilst it's more than column 1, is a bit less than column 2. And you can see if you go through the figures, we've applied it across the funding factors pretty much uniformly. The exception of that is the lump sum, where we just have matched the factor. But everything else we've just scaled back by, I think it's a pretty uniform percentage, Andy, just nod if that's the case. Yeah. So you can see everything should go down by the same sort of percentage factor. Just to put that in context, the sort of impact of that was 300 and something thousand, I think, in total, so the 2 factors. But the extra money from the school supplementary grant is 4 million quid. So compared to sort of where we thought we'd be last time, there's a pretty significant net gain for schools from those developments. Just a reminder that as well as the funding form, that there's 1 or 2 protections in place. So you've got the MFG, so that is a funding protection per pupil, and we put that at the highest level we're allowed to. So every school gets a minimum 2% increase in 22-23. There's also something the Dfe introduced 2-3 years ago, which is minimum funding levels per pupil. So that basically means once you've worked out the funding formula, if the net sum of all the factors doesn't hit the levels, 4,265 for primaries, 5,525 for secondaries, the funding formula is then topped up to get to that level. And we've got a fair few schools on that now because it's gone up a couple of times. And basically what it does, it means that less deprived schools get a bit of a top up. That's the net effect of it. Because if you've got quite a lot of deprivation, and normally which sort of goes with it, low prior attainment, your funding per pupil is going to be higher as a school. So if both of those factors aren't particularly high, your funding pupil is going to be lower, and this tops you back up. So in that sense, it has a contrary impact to when they brought in the pupil premium a few years ago. Obviously, that was directing money to more deprived schools. And then a decade later, there's another factor that's come in that effectively directs money in a completely different direction. So, you know, a cynic would say you sort of get back to where you started after these various initiatives, but that's what it does anyway. That's significant for some schools too. We always have to, we go, I mean, most of the discussion, the full funding formula is with you guys. So as you know, it comes up in 2 or 3 meetings each year, but the formal agreement, the approval of it is a cabinet decision. So it's about that bit remains with the council. So the cabinet met last Thursday. We went through the details of what we're going to do as a paper presented to the cabinet, and they were happy that we carry on as we describe in this paper, which in essence means A, we try and mimic the national funding form as close as possible, and B, we fund schools when there's significant growth. That's kind of really what it amounts to, and that was what was agreed.
Can I just stop you there, Tim? Has anybody got any issues they want to raise on that? I know it's a slight dip, but it's not significant, is it, Tim? We talked about it the other day. We're talking fairly minor impact on the budget.
We're talking about sort of 140 odd million, so you know, 300,000 isn't that much, and that is sort of overwhelmed by the millions of pounds extra that's coming in to the supplementary grant. Yeah,
which we weren't expecting, were we? That's just sort of coming.
I think they alluded to, the Chancellor said something about it in the budget, which I think sort of passed me by because it was very sort of vague. So I must say I was pleasantly surprised when I saw the scale of what had come in.
I think it's a COVID response in a different way, because I think looking at pressures on supply costs in schools, the issues we're having, I suspect it's a sort of, we're going to give schools a bit more money through this grant just to help them get through this next 12 months. So, and also maybe to do a bit of overstaffing in order to, manage staff absence as we come out of COVID. So, yeah, okay. Everybody happy with that then? Claire, your hand's up.
Yeah, can I just ask, is the supplementary grant a one-off, or is it likely to continue? Do you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. What they said is that this year it's not part of DSG, but next year it'll be subsumed in DSG. So basically, to answer your question, it's not money that will just come in and then get whipped away. It's money that will then sort of form part of the baseline for next year.
Okay.
So that's sort of reiterated as sort of genuinely, good news. It's not just a one-off SOP. It is sort of built into the baseline.
Thanks, Claire. And but I also think we need to understand that we don't know what the pay award is going to be for teachers. So they give it on one hand and we'll probably take it away on the other, because we'll end up,
That's right. The very source of this money, of course, is the increase in NI.
Yeah.
And it's an increase in NI both for us employees, but also for employers. So you've immediately got a 1.25% increase on school costs on that, as well as pay awards.
Yeah. So, and we don't know anything about the pay awards, but I imagine the teaching unions are gearing themselves up for a good debate with the government on teacher pay awards, as there wasn't one last year. So I think
we've still got the £30,000 starting salary floating around as an issue. And, if that does come in, you would imagine there'll be a bit of a ripple effect in the main teachers' pay scale. So as you say, it's difficult really to quite envisage what the increase will be. And, for maintained schools, it's only part of the financial year. It's obviously the full year for academies, but I think you'd have to expect a fairly substantial increase in payroll costs in schools.
Yeah. So good news that we may stand still. Which is always the way. And they love, Claire, giving these grants and then the following year subsuming it within the DSG, so it sort of gets lost again. So
that teacher pay grants was the other one, wasn't it? We mentioned that the other day. Same happened with that.
Same happened with teacher pay grants. So it's just a weird way of managing the way they finance schools. Okay, so do you want to just pick up a little bit on the supplementary grant then on your paper?
Yeah, so I've quoted the total amount, but I thought it'd be useful just to see how it works. So it's applied to the basic per pupil rate, a lump sum, and the FSM 6 rate. Quoted the rates in the paper. And we've also put on the form website. The government itself is going to notify us, and then we'll passport to schools the actual amounts. So when the budget information comes out from us, probably in the next week, we won't have the formal notification this per school. But because the government have published how they're going to calculate it, we've gone ahead and calculated anyway. One assumes it'll be pretty close. So we've put all those on the form website. So for each of your individual schools and all schools in Telford Wrekin, you can see how much this will deliver in terms of additional funding. To give you some sort of broad idea, and we looked at it, the average came at about 165 grand for secondaries and about 40 grand for primaries. So as I say, not sort of life-changingly wonderful amounts, but still not to be sniffed at. A fair amount of extra cash for individual schools. And then just moving on from that to the other blocks, so high needs and central school services. So high needs, we knew we were going to get a fair amount extra. We thought 2.5 million, maybe a bit more. We've only talked about 2.75 million. That would take our allocation to about 30 million, just over 30.5 million, in fact. But also the supplementary grant that we've talked about before, that was also applied to the high needs block. So that delivered another £1 million. So it's a pretty hefty increase in high needs this year. Having said that, I'm sure this is quite a sting in the tail, because I think this is what we would have expected. But the DFE did put out something, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the last couple of days anyway. And they alluding to this increase, but then saying to local authorities, don't expect the same level of increases in years beyond 22-23. So they suggested we should plan for a 5% increase in 23-24 and then 3% increase in 24-25 onwards. Okay. Now, in one sense, this is kind of what we thought. I mean, I couldn't see how they could keep on putting in another 10% or more per year. The thing that myself and Simon did pick up on, though, is that you may be aware that they've been meant to be publishing a green paper, I think it is, Simon, on SEN. And this has been talked about for, well, a couple of years at least, maybe longer than that. And I think the latest word we had was that, again, it's been put off until September. Now, from our point of view, the two go in tandem. So the reason we're spending money in high needs more every year is two things. One is more kids and more kids with high needs. Okay, fair enough. And then the other thing is the government's sort of policy and overarching sort of guidance in this area. So really, if they want us to tell us, look, live within this limited means, they also need to look at their system. The two are two sides of the same coin. So they sort of amount the funding bit without really telling us what they're going to do with the policy bits, which again is not really ideal. So we'll have to see. But I mean, on the more positive side, from my point of view, from a finance point of view, it's just useful to have something to plan around. Just like you at schools, if they did give you a 3-year budget, even if it's only indicative, that's useful for you because it gives you some sort of idea. Same for us. So I don't want to be too negative about it. It's useful to know what they're planning. But equally, we can't guarantee to you or them that that's going to be enough unless they explain how their policy is going to work. So,
and like you say, and I'm sure Simon agrees, they've just delayed and delayed, haven't they, the SEND review. So
yeah, they have.
So, but on the other hand, Tim, high needs is quite reasonable in Telford, isn't it? Compared
it is. Yes, it
to
is.
local authorities, we're not in a bad place.
I mean, there are other authorities with multi-million-pound deficits, not just a few hundred thousand, multi-million pounds, and they've got involved with DFE and recovery plans. And that's not us. We had a deficit, I think, about £500,000 a few years ago, which we talked to you about. We've cleared that. This year, probably we'll sort of end up with something around the 0-ish mark, somewhere either side, with a few £1,000 leeway, because it's, there's that margin of error, but that's not bad. The only thing to say is the only reason we're doing that is because we get another 2.5–3 million quid every year. If that dried up, we would quickly be in some difficulties. So whilst we didn't expect that to continue, going back to previous points, if they're only going to increase it by a lesser sum, unless the overarching framework changes, we too will probably going to end up struggling at some point. So we wait the government's green paper with interest, I think.
Yeah, well, don't hold your breath.
No. I'm not sure they said just September with a year attached. They said just September and then.
So we're going to bring a more detailed paper about high needs next time, so you can get a feel for if you like, how we've spent the additional £2 million that we got this year on top of the existing budget, and all of the work we're doing around, the cluster development and the alternative provision work and all that early intervention stuff has come about because we have, with your support, been able to manage our need really well locally. So when Tim is talking about authorities that have got multi-million-pound deficits, you often find a lot of them are having to commission really very, very high cost special school places out of county, and our strength definitely is in the way that we work together in order to try and meet need locally. So let's continue. Definitely.
No, great, thank you. And any other comments? I noticed Rachel, you're on the call. Nice to see you, Rachel.
Hi, sorry I was late. Parent issue, but
we totally understand. These things happen. Okay, thanks for that, Tim. And we'll move on then if nobody's got any other questions on the funding model. Okay, we're doing very well, 10 to 10. So we're back on Tim. So this was something we touched on at the last meeting, but we weren't too sure what the DFE were going to do with this issue. You've now just heard, haven't you, Tim, what the next step with this is. So Tim, do you want to talk about dedelegation of school improvement services, please? And I think we need to understand this is just for the maintained sector, isn't it?
It is, that's right. So we did sort of touch on it last time, so I'll just very briefly summarise what's been proposed. So for the last few years, there's been a school improvement grant that's been provided to local authorities, and it's been paid out in proportion to the number of maintained schools in the authority. And the intention is to support the statutory duties that we still have for maintained schools. So statutory means we've got to do these things. This is set out in law. We can't trade them, which would be, obvious example, because we have to do them. Schools can't decide whether or not it applies to them if they're a maintained school. So for us in 21-22, we had 181,652 through this grant. And pretty late on, something like, I think about October, November, the government announced that they were intending to get rid of this grant in two steps. Firstly, half would go in 22-23, and then the rest would go in 23-24. Now, they've got to consult on these sort of things. So at the same time they said that, they did a consultation, which expired just before Christmas, I think the deadline. And then they've, 2 days ago, I think it was, they published their response to the consultation. So to make the point, this is a very rushed way of doing things. So their response to the consultation was basically that they're going to continue with their proposals intact. Say a little bit more about that in a minute. But in terms of funding that, the DFE's proposal is that we ask maintained schools to de-delegate. And just to emphasise, we sort of have to fund this because we have to do these activities. We can't choose not to because they're statutory. Right, so there's sort of the statutory duties we've got to do are set out in Part 4 of the Education and Inspections Act and in the DFE's Schools Cause and Concern Guidance. So there's a little bit in section 2 about what that guidance talks about, and 2.2 lists some of the main areas, which is understanding the performance of maintained schools in their area, using data as a starting point to identify any that are underperforming. I'll work with them to explore ways to support progress. Work closely with the RSC, diocese and the local partners to support schools. Again, work with the RSC where underperformance has been recognised to ensure the right approach, which will include sending warning notices and using intervention powers. So this is obviously the hard-edged bit of it, which you hope not to get to. And encourage good and outstanding maintained schools to take responsibility for their own improvement, support other schools, and enable other schools to access the support they need to improve. Now, as well as this grant, we have had the power for a few years to de-delegate additional funds to support school improvement, which quite a few of the local authorities have done. We haven't done that. We've taken the view that we would sort of cut our cloth, so we would carry out these activities within the parameters of the grant, which is pretty much what we've done. So then we turn to our sort of how we deliver this locally. You'll be aware that the 7 teaching school delivers the sort of the traded element of school improvement. So it is just the statutory bit really. There is some traded sort of stuff that we do around training and such like, but you'd be aware that the 7 teaching school alliance is the main body to deliver that sort of traded school improvement. We do have a number of staff doing school improvement, but they have sort of a hybrid role. So some of it is statutory duties, some of it is doing stuff that does generate some income. And again, this is a pattern that's sort of repeated several different areas of council, where one of the ways we try to make our services efficient and as cost effective as possible is to both deliver the statutory bits, but also do some trades activity as well. And so you often find the same people doing a bit of both. Even I do a little bit of tradie stuff, although not very much. So just in terms of where we are, we still have most of our schools as maintained schools. You'll be aware that there's a clear sectoral difference here. So most secondary schools are academies. We've just got 2 maintained schools remaining, but most primary schools are still maintained. So in terms of the numbers of schools, it's still a large majority of schools in the borough are still maintained schools, 72%. The details how we actually sort of deliver the statutory functions are in the Securing School Improvement Protocol, which I've got a link to. From our point of view, we think we've got a pretty strong track record of working well with schools, that schools aren't allowed just to sort of stay in a less than good place, that we do intervene. We do support schools. We've only had to invoke formal powers of intervention once in the last 5 years. Rather sort of disingenuously, I thought the DFE tried to use this sort of thing as an excuse to cut the funding by saying that local authorities didn't need to use it, didn't need the funding because they didn't statutorily intervene much. Well, no, we don't statutorily intervene much because we work with schools to avoid that. I mean, you know, it's one of those things you read a DFA document and there's kind of a slight stunned silence as you're actually reading it, thinking, what? But anyway, that's locally, obviously that's what we try and do. We don't want to invoke statutory powers to intervene. We want to work with schools and make sure they're on the right track before we get to that point. And part of that does involve me to follow a theme. Local authority, we do try and work in partnership. So we work in partnership with the 7 teaching school. We work with academies as well as maintained schools. We work with you guys in the 4. In terms of the cost, I say we've tried to keep it within the grant levels. Because of that, what we're going to be asking de-delegation for is again within the grant level, so we're not going beyond that. Just a bit about the consultation, which has been published, and again, there's a link to the government response. There was a question about whether respondents thought that the government's proposals would adequately fund local authority statutory powers. Something like 70% of respondents said no. The government has just carried on regardless. So I'll pass on without comments on that approach to consultation. So in terms of the proposals then, because then you can, obviously I'll open it up for any sort of, Sam may want to say something, you guys. What are we proposing then? So half the grant will remain for 22-23. So the 181,000 and a bit, we will get half of that next year. So we propose to de-delegate the remaining half, just over 90,000. So in terms of the impact on schools, just a reminder to just maintain schools. We propose to do it on a simple amount per pupil. So keep it fairly straightforward. It'd be £6.31 per pupil. So if you take that and apply it to your school, that would give you an idea of how much it would be. Right, so I'll stop there for any comments or questions.
Tim, can I just, or Jill, can I just come in?
Yeah, please do, so I was just going to bring you in.
I think Tim has really articulated the issue that we've got really, really well. I think I just wanted to make sure that you're aware of our level of frustration around having to come here and ask you for this money. It is a continued statutory duty. So some of the phrases you were using earlier with the other report, we've thought that they're making a cut to funding without changing the policy, giving it on one hand and taking it away with another. Yeah, really, really frustrated. We made a strong response in terms of the consultation. There are over 500 consultations that were made, a lot from clearly the maintained sector, but councils as well. And there was a clear response that this was something that we don't really understand. However, they have gone ahead with it, and that only happened 2 days ago. So our level of frustration at the moment, as you can imagine, is quite high. In terms of moving forward, we hear, the horizon scanning is that potentially there's a white paper coming, and will that white paper make some changes in terms of the expectations around statutory duties on local authorities with school improvement? Possibly, but we don't know yet. So if you like, we're in a position where we've got an existing protocol, we've got an existing way of working with our maintained sector, we've got people in jobs, and clearly we need to think about how we move over the next 12 months, because I do think that there will be some change coming ahead. So whilst we know that the grant's reducing by 50% initially in the first year and then totally the next year, that gives me a signal that maybe there's something coming down the road for when we can have a discussion again this time next year about the grant. But yeah, we are seeking to make up that shortfall in terms of the grant, the cut that's made in terms of that maintained sector and school improvement. So I'll stop there and seek any questions.
Thanks, Simon. And Heather's just put up a comment to say it's no longer the 7 teaching school, it's the very long name.
The acronym stayed the same though. If you call us SDS, you're all right.
Yeah.
That's why we did it.
Yeah. So we just called it STSA. Okay, brilliant. Robert, I can see you got your hand up first. Do you want to come in?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've got a few issues with it, and I understand the predicament you're in. But I mean, looking at the value that it would cost our school, it's about £1,400, and it's the question around like the value for money and the accountability that actually I could have sort of like 6-7 sessions from the STS for that, and actually that would probably have a better impact than as a green school my 1 session. So the justification of actually you're taking a lot, I mean, and I understand the predicament, but for value for money, it's better value for money that I go with the SDS.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks for your comment. Rachel?
I absolutely see the predicament as well, and I think it would be really helpful for head teachers to have a list of what the statutory duties are, so that everybody's clear, because I know I'm a little bit foggy. I know what some of them are, but I think it would be really helpful for head teachers to have a list of what statutory the statutory duties are that the local authority have to perform, and therefore what we are contributing towards. I think that would help. I also have asked, and I know this is slightly unrelated, for a list from I think it's facilities, Chris Golson, of what the landlord responsibilities are versus the head teacher. So I always bring up trees. Everyone knows I'm the tree lady, and I've had another disaster recently that's cost me thousands of pounds with a giant beech that had to come down limited. But it's who pays for that. And I think it would be so helpful to have that clarification on what the statutory duties are and also what the landlord versus the head teacher duties are with responsibilities for the building, the trees, the paths, the boilers, etc. If possible, I think that would help people to justify the money.
Can I come back on that? Because I know I have seen some guidance regarding landlord v head teacher or school responsibility. So Rachel, let me come back to you on that, because that's definitely in train. The statutory duties, Tim's done quite a good job in terms of just providing a bit of a summary on this paper. But clearly, if there's more that you need, then that's fine. The frustration again is that they've made this judgment on the fact that a lot of local authorities are not issuing formal warning notices. And again, just want to re-emphasise Tim's point that, well, the fact that we don't issue those notices is actually a strength in the system, because we're working preventively to make sure schools do not fall into a warning notice. But yeah, okay.
Thanks, Simon. Claire, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just to say, when we talked about it in the Newport cluster, again, we appreciate the position that you're in. But as Robert said, is there not a way, rather than per pupil, or could the cost be adjusted annually according to which category you're in? Because like you say, Robert, if you're a green school, you're getting one visit. And after the 50% year, when it becomes 100%, we're paying over £2,500 for one visit, when we can pay £250 for 7 teaching. And the other point they raised that was that we are all already paying into 7 teaching, so we're kind of doubling up the cost there. So is there a way of, you know, if we find ourselves in a lower category, which I appreciate we can all do at any time and have been there in the past, then the cost be raised to kind of, for that support, extra support that you would get, rather than you're paying quite a lot of money in some cases with not a big budget, for not a lot of service, really.
Yeah.
Thanks, Claire.
Position.
Okay, I'll try and summarise this in a minute. Heather, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think probably it's partly about the definition of school improvement, isn't it? Because the work that STSA do, or that other people, you know, schools buy different services from different people as well, is very much about that kind of school's agenda and driving that internal school improvement. But I think the school improvement role that a local authority has is very much about that monitoring, holding to account, and it's really difficult, isn't it, because you need the infrastructure that's there to be able to respond to issues as they arise. So I understand that sometimes schools perhaps need that more than others, but I would imagine it's kind of wider, because it's everything, isn't it, from looking at exclusions, looking at attendance, looking at all sorts of things from a monitoring point of view as well. So I think probably when that additional information comes, it'll probably potentially be a bit clearer in terms of that funding. But I think there's almost within school improvement different functions that people are providing.
Thanks, Heather. I mean, I think this is a really complex issue, because when we met on Monday to discuss it, to prepare for this meeting, we didn't even know if this was going to go through. So, you know, it's very 11th hour that we're having to bring this to forum. And I understand both Robert and Claire's point. I suppose my view would be that we ought to support the local authority through forum on this occasion, get some transparent information out to heads, with the proviso that there'll be far more discussion with heads moving forward around A, statutory duties of the local authority, and B, what schools will get as part of the offer from their de-delegated funds. Because I do understand both arguments. I think if we'd had more time to think about this, then, you know, we'd all come up with a better plan. But at the moment, we are literally, and, you know, I know it doesn't impact on me as much, but I am a huge supporter of the local authority. And if they, you know, it's a bit like, do you buy into the trade union costs? You know, if you don't, then you don't get the trade union support. If you do, you do get it. And sometimes you've never had any trade union issues, and then when it comes and hits you like a brick. So yeah, it's sort of a comfort blanket for schools that may get into difficulty with not of their own making, but will require support from the local authority. So yeah, it's a difficult one. But at this stage, I think with schools getting some extra cash, you know, we're not in this financial year, then perhaps Forum could support this with the understanding to Simon and Tim that there's an awful lot more work to do on this before we make any further decisions. So I'm happy to take further comments.
A couple more points. I mean, Simon, you mentioned that obviously like the potential of like jobs could be lost. I know you didn't say those words, but you said a reshuffle and stuff like that. Can I check that if any jobs were lost, the redundancy money wouldn't come out of this fund?
I don't, Tim. I don't. I mean, that's not even something I've even thought about, Rob, if I'm honest. But
well, yeah, I mean, again, I'm sort of in a bit because I haven't really thought about it either. But my first response is no one have thought so, because dedelegation statute is meant to pay for services.
Yeah.
You know, and if someone is made redundant, by definition, that's not providing a service, is it? That's a kind of a cost. However, on the connected issue, I would just emphasise the point that the DfE has only confirmed this week.
Yeah.
Our budget year starts 1st of April. People are in post now. You know, it seems to me wholly unreasonable from the DfE. Now, it puts you guys, I think, in a difficult position as a forum, doesn't it? Because you perhaps feel that this has been something that's been presented to you and you want more information. But with the best will in the world, what can we do as a local authority? You know, we didn't know this was going to happen for sure until Tuesday.
And it's absolutely fascinating. The government has gone completely against the consultation and railroaded this in 11th hour. Claire, you've got your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Sorry, so I had one more point. Sorry, one more.
Oh, sorry, Rob.
Yeah, sorry. It's more, for me again. It's around accountability, and it's lovely. Like this, but it's my experience of like I don't think there's much accountability, or it's not something that's fed back to us as heads again. And I don't think we have much. I know it's always all about consultation this and consultation that, but I'm not sure I have ever really had much or anything back from what the service has provided. What's its impact been? And again, I think that's something that. Again, I want to know is actually that are the people in the team the best people in the team, and it's not having. Please don't think I'm taking anything personally at all, but it's like with any traded service that I want to buy in, I want to know it's going to give me value for money and there's accountability, and actually what impact has this duty had on schools and health.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point, Rob. That you know we. And often, you know, intervention goes into schools and it's kept fairly quiet. It's not broadcast because it can be very confidential matters. But I think, Simon, some sort of analysis over time of, you know, where you've been able to support schools through the service and also taking Tim's point, you know, we're talking people's jobs here in a very short window of time for the local authority to manage the team. But I think, Simon, I'm not talking for you, but it's a piece of work to do with the heads around what the school improvement service is going to look like, because this isn't going to go away.
The one positive thing I think we can take from this is it gives us an opportunity to look at the model of practice, doesn't it? And actually for you to ask these questions and for us then to collectively agree. So what would a good model of practice look like within the statutory duties that we need to provide? So let's embrace that and let's do that. But yeah, it's the timing issue for me now. You know, it's there's a lot of detail actually. There's a lot of responses I was going to make, Claire, when you were talking about the green and the red schools and the level intervention and the costs. And I can imagine the conversations I would have with schools that are potentially going into the red category. And then, oh, by the way, you've got an additional cost as well coming. But that's things that we need to work out, isn't it, over the next kind of year, if you like, in order to work out what the best practice would be. But it does give us an opportunity for you to ask these questions now, for us to come to think about what model we want to commission for the future, for sure.
Yeah, because ultimately you're moving from providing a service to be a commissioner, aren't you, really? Because schools are de-delegating. It changes the relationship slightly, doesn't it?
It does change the relationship for sure. This is why it's useful to have a grant so that we can produce a unified framework which makes sense for everybody. But I'll say again, we've got an opportunity for you to ask these questions for us to shape what it looks like in the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Claire, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Just really that the other thing that the Newport heads brought up, again, similarly to what Robert's just said, was questions over the kind of the quality and the consistency of the service that we have now. Obviously, without going into detail.
Yeah,
I would be willing to talk to you, Simon, about.
Yeah, I think if we can pick that up, it's probably a separate conversation, but I'm hearing what you're saying. But if we can pick that up in a different forum, then I'd appreciate that. Yeah.
And I think lots of heads understand what the Newport heads are saying, Claire. And Simon, I've had conversations about this. So yeah, people want that quality, don't they? And they want that to know that they get the good feedback, they get the next steps, they get something in writing. That it's very, very clear what is going on across that service. Rob, your hands up again.
Find one from there. I might shut up. I might not do. One of the issues, one final thing is obviously I would then what I like, and I've come from London, so I like a good, strong local authority, and I really appreciate the service given. However, I would like to call into question the issue of then impartiality, making those decisions. And then if you haven't got enough money, would you make as many reds and greens and yellows when actually if you made lots of reds, it cost you a lot more money, or actually if you made lots of reds, it would make you more money. And I would like to see a very robust procedure and policy for that, because actually it could be a way of making yourself some good money by just making everyone red.
I am telling you now, I am not interested in making money for that purpose. I'm interested in good schools, great outcomes for kids. That's what matters for all of us. So definitely, Robert, that is not going to happen under my watch.
Good to hear.
I do feel like as a new head, it feels to me like a real double up of things. So I meet with my advisor from 7 Teaching, and then I meet with your representative, and I'm having the same conversations. And I feel like, for goodness sake, this is the 3rd or 4th time, and I'm having the same conversations, obviously, with governors. And I just think, if I've then got to pay for 2 lots of that, why would I do that? I only want that to happen once, because I've got plenty to do, and I don't want to have the same conversation.
This is already a really rich conversation.
Like, you're absolutely right. And I know, Heather, when you set up the 7 teaching school offer for people to buy into, there was a huge discussion, wasn't there, around confidentiality and sharing reports that the 7 advisors had produced with the local authority. And I can remember lots of emails flying around at the time as people got quite heated about it, but maybe that's another conversation to relaunch again. So like you say, Claire, there's some agreement around protocols. So you're not, because I absolutely feel your pain on that one. You just don't want to keep having the same school improvement conversation with different people who have different views and different levels of expertise.
It would be good if we could somehow split that, so that maybe one party were doing certain things and then another were doing something else, so that it's not like the repetition.
Heather, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that when it was set up, it was made really clear that the teaching school is funded by the head teachers, and that's what the heads wanted. And therefore, under everything from data sharing, that service goes to the school, and schools can share notes of visits, they can share summary reports, and we would actively support that. Anything that I have, I do actively share that with the local authority, but that remains the decision of the school, and I think probably most do. In terms of category schools, what we've done is, between the local authority and ourselves, the advisors then are funded to go to those meetings, and they attend as many as they can, dependent obviously on commitments and timetabling, with a view to try to make that synergy. But ultimately the roles are different, because the school is funding a school improvement partner to work with them, to work in that kind of challenge and support role, whereas the local authority school improvement role is a slightly different role as well within it. But it does give an opportunity to refresh and relook at things, providing there is time to do that. If somebody said to me, could we do that in the next however many weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, then I wouldn't think that was a possible achievable with any of us, even if we didn't have anything else to do all day, which clearly we all do.
No, that's a really good point. And I think, Simon, you're talking about a more significant piece of work over a period of time. So when we get to this position next year, which we're going to get to, you know, we've got a robust model in place that heads are either going to agree to, but it needs to go out to all head teachers, doesn't it? I mean, we represent groups of heads, but I think it needs to go back out and be really consulted with through primary heads and secondary heads and special school heads, so that there's agreement, and because it's a thorny issue. I think it'd be good to have a clear list on it. Yeah, I just see lots of comments coming through from people. Thank you. So has anybody got anything else they'd like to add? Because we are going to have to move to a vote on this, I'm afraid. Anybody got anything else they'd like to add?
So we're not voting for the 2 years, we're just voting for 1 year, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So we're voting for the initial sum of money, and I think with the huge proviso that there's going to be a big unpicking of this particular area and looking at what this funding is doing for schools or not doing, and that heads will have an input into it.
Sorry, I know the budget's in April and stuff like that, but is there not something like, at least there's some really unanswered questions here on like the statutory services, and actually I don't feel I'm able to make that decision today because I don't have all the information. So maybe like if it could be that we've got another one next month, haven't we? Or we could maybe have an emergent one, just actually for Simon to say actually what we do deliver, because actually I've read all the documents, I've read the information, but £1,400 is a lot of money. No, £96,000 from across the schools is a lot of money when actually most schools don't know it's going to happen.
Okay, I'll take that point. Andy, you got your hand up?
Unfortunately, part of the consultation did mention that the APT, which is the method by which we tell the DFE what the budgets are and what's been de-delegated and the like, has to be submitted next week. So effectively, leaving it till March will actually be too late to actually meet their own deadlines.
Okay, all right. Useful to know that. Claire, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, I mean, I've been instructed by my colleagues to vote no unless they get more information about, like you say, the details. They want me to go back to them before they'd make it a yes, unfortunately.
Okay. Rachel? You're on mute, I think, Rachel.
We had an extraordinary cluster meeting yesterday where we were talking in majority about the cluster-based working pilots and the actual money that some schools are getting as their portion of the pie, I suppose, for that. There were heads saying, well, we can't afford to, and that would be equivalent to what they would have to pay for this de-delegation, if you see what I mean. And they were already struggling to say, well, we can't afford for a portion of a family support worker, or we can't afford to get a counsellor in. So I know for a fact that there are certain schools, especially the smaller schools, that are going to really, really struggle with this. So I would feel much more comfortable, even if you say next week, if it was the tail end of next week, that we could perhaps meet with our clusters again to have further discussions urgently.
Simon, do you want to respond to this?
I mean, I've got a plea in the sense that, you know, we've got the statutory guidance that's come out that makes it clear what which we've put in here around the duties that we've got as a local authority in terms of the intervention work that we do. The work that you're requesting an additional list, I'll need to go over to legal to make sure that we've got all of that in line. And that is that. And we're responding to COVID at the moment. I totally get it though, because I get the predicament and I get the questions that are being asked. What I'm saying that we're absolutely committed to is working on this over the next year to make sure that we totally have that open conversation and we get that model of practice in place. The additional, we are making sure that you've got additional money in terms of the high needs block with the cluster work. I mean, that's a bit of a separate conversation. We've got the additional supplementary grant that's coming through to schools as well that Tim talked about. So it's a challenge, for all of us in terms of getting all of that information and having all of that conversation before the deadline that we need to send up in terms of the DFE and getting this over the line. The predicament is for all of us is strong, and I understand the conversations that you've had in your cluster meetings for sure, but also I understand the pressure that we've got in order to move this forward. So apologies, I'm as frustrated as you are, because it does need more conversation, it does need more detail, but we also don't have the time. And if you like, what we're proposing is to move forward this year, and as I say, have that review in place for next year. Really difficult. I really appreciate the difficulty, I do.
Right, this is where you think, why am I chair of schools forum? So are we saying, so I've just looked, Yvonne, you've just made a comment that you've not even discussed it in your cluster yet. Claire, you're saying you've been instructed to vote no. Any other comments on that? Rob, are you in a cluster? Are you representing your cluster?
Well, I mean, I wasn't, because we've been very busy, I've not been able to discuss it with my cluster either, because again, it's nice that there's a problem, but schools are absolutely at the face of it again. So we've not discussed it. I'm just emailing the cluster now. Claire might have been able to discuss it, but then she's in academy, so it wouldn't matter anyway, or it'd be a different issue. I personally, I feel we need more time to discuss this, and I would like to come back.
Can I just make one comment on this? And the comment is, these are statutory duties, so we can't not do them. And also that because of the way it's worked out, the request for funding is only half the actual cost that we're saying it is. So we can't decide next year as things stand not to do these statutory duties. So if we took the scenario where schools didn't agree to this, the fallback is we go to the DFE, because the statutory is like all the other things. I think there's a clear difference between a traded service and a statutory duty. We have to do these duties regardless. The way we do them, of course, as all of you have been commenting on, is definitely up for debate, but the actual doing of these duties, we do have to do them.
We need to know clearly exactly what those duties are.
Okay, Claire, have you got your hands up? Did you have something else to add? No, okay, fine. Right, well, we've got two choices here, in my opinion. We either move to a vote and heads have to make decisions based on their representation from their clusters, or we buy a bit of time, Simon, get something out to heads in the next day or so, and we have a very quick schools forum meeting at the beginning of next week where we will have to go to a vote. Simon, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back and we can list again the schools causing concern guidance so that it's clear exactly what our statutory duties are. I think the conversation, I'm just kind of getting a sense that the conversations I feel that would happen with clusters is probably around, the model of practice and all the things we've talked about. Yeah. So I'm not quite sure how those are going to move forward. No, we have got this statutory duty, yeah. And I'm happy to kind of go back to the guidance and give you the guidance. I mean, as I say, Tim hasn't put it into this paper.
I think the problem we've got here is, listening to the heads, is that not every head understands and not every head receives forum papers, and some of the clusters haven't met. So if we could just rejig that section of Tim's paper and you send it out as an absolute priority email to every head, and then say, we need to strongly agree this for the next 12 months to have this dedelegation, but with the proviso that this is going to be reviewed and we'll take heads' views on the strategy moving forward and the service that it provide, because I think we're in danger probably of losing the vote at the moment.
Yeah, and this is the real frustration I've got with the time frame. 2 days ago we were heard about this. It's absolutely ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. And for like you, I've now got 2 days full of other things, as I'm sure you can imagine. So I do appreciate it though. We are where we are, aren't we? Tim, after this meeting, we'll have to put the something together.
Yeah, I think, just a one side of A4, I'm not talking War and Peace, but I think just something out to every single head to say this has got to go to an emergency forum vote early next week, and we literally meet and take the vote, and that's the end of the matter if everybody's happy. And then I just urge the heads on the call, to support this conversation with your cluster heads, because I know what it's like. I know heads could very quickly go, well, I don't need that because my school's okay. I don't like that particular person who comes in. This is doubling up work. I'm saying it as it is, I think. And we're just not in the luxury of time to make those heads understand completely the position the local authority is in at the moment. But on the other hand, these people are all in maintained schools and expect a service from the local authority. Heads have chosen to remain with the local authority, and therefore you can't have it always, can you? You either support the work of the local authority or you don't, and you make other decisions.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to people? Are people happy that we just get something out, a really quick briefing note to say we need to move to a vote on this? And I do think, Simon, we need to be asking heads to support this in the short term with the understanding that there's a thorough piece of work to do. It's really difficult, I know, around the current issues we're all facing in schools. Yvonne, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, very quickly. I mean, I don't think it's a case of heads either supporting or not supporting the authority. From my point of view as a new head, it's about having all the information that I need to make that decision and having the opportunity to talk about it with other heads in the cluster who are much more experienced than I am. And I'd really struggle to make a decision today, having all the facts, because I don't feel like I do. This is very new to me. I've only attended 2 meetings, but obviously, having worked in other authorities, I really value the support that we get from the local authority, as well as that I get from the STSA. So I wouldn't want people to think that, as a head, I'm negating what the authority offer. And I just felt it was important to say that.
Thanks, Yvonne. No, really welcome your comments. Any other comments?
Still, and I do think we work in such a strong partnership, and I speak to my colleagues in other local authorities where they just do not have the same relationships with schools. So we do work together. I totally understand the conversations that we're having. But these are we're talking about people, the same people that were here supporting us all during the COVID pandemic. The frustration for me is absolutely massive. Massive in terms of the situation that this has put us in. So okay,
but I think
just to come back on that one though, but obviously as the statutory duties, the money will have to come from somewhere. So those people, like you just mentioned, yes, they have supported us, and I really appreciate it, but the money will have to come from somewhere.
Yeah, what I don't
doesn't mean it will end.
No, I mean, Tim has mentioned that we can go back to the DFE if we get a no vote. I mean, that isn't the way that we operate in Telford. We work on this together. The frustrating thing for me is the lack of time we've got to kind of do what you want us to do. And that's it, isn't it? You're right. It's statutory duty. We can't stop it now. But we've made the point.
Okay. So much as I would like to move to a vote, I just don't feel that we can at this stage, and I don't want to upset forum members by forcing a vote that I don't think you're going to carry anyway. So can we get something out to Tim and Simon, just a little bit of expansion on your comments, but I think it needs to go to all heads as a real urgent issue that forum have to make this decision Monday or Tuesday of next week.
Did we want to meet again as a forum, another Teams meeting, or do you want to do it by some sort of email? How do you want to play that?
People happy to jump on a Teams call early next week?
Yeah, Teams I would prefer.
Okay. Do you want to set that date now, Tim?
Can do, yeah. What people think.
I'm just conscious of everybody's urgent issues. Let me just have a look at my diary. It's Monday's going to be too soon, isn't it? I think by the time we get
Yeah.
something out. What's your deadline, Andy? What, end of next week or? Can't hear you.
I think it's Friday, isn't it, Andy?
Yeah, by Friday, so really Thursday night.
So I could do something Wednesday morning-ish. Does that fit with people?
Sorry, Jill, who would you want at the meeting? Do you just want the members that actually vote on this? Because, I mean, it seems pointless dragging in the other academy members who haven't got a vote.
Yeah. So just forum members who need to vote on this, and obviously I'll have to do it as chair. So happy to do that. So
that would be all primary school members. It would be Heather as the special schools member and Darren as the PRU member.
Okay. Sarah's saying, what are you saying, Sarah? Okay. So should we try and do it at 10 o'clock on Wednesday the 19th?
Yeah.
Can everybody make that happen?
Yeah.
Literally, it's going to be a 5-minute call, I think.
Would it be the same time, 9:30?
Sorry?
Would it be the same time at 9:30?
I was just suggesting 10 o'clock. I'm just out at one of our schools, so by the time I get back here, it's going to be about 10 o'clock. Can we go for 10?
Mm-hmm. I've got governors in from 9 till 11, so I'd have to jump out of that quickly and then jump back again.
Is that okay, Rachel?
Yeah, I'll make it work. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. All right, so I think the position we're in then, Simon, Tim, is a short paper. Can you send it out as an urgent on your, I don't know whether you do it on your notice board or how you're going to do it?
Well, I'd send it to all maintained schools in Telford, but then I'd probably strongly hint that you're going to hold a conversation in your clusters. Is that right?
So
I would say if anyone has any strong feedback, like to contact the cluster or discuss it in the cluster, then it's done, really, isn't it? They don't need to necessarily straight back to you, Simon. It's just they come to the cluster.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, okay, thank you, Rob.
Yeah, they come back to cluster head only if they've got an issue, if they're happy for it to go through, because otherwise we're going to end up in a communications nightmare.
If we assume they've read it, they've had it, they look at it, and then if they've got any issue, then otherwise it's done.
Otherwise, you're going to be voting for the motion. Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
Great. All right. I know, Tim and Simon, it's not the result you wanted this morning, but I think we have. If we lose the goodwill of the heads, we're not going to go anywhere fast on this.
It's totally understandable what people are asking for, and this is how we work, isn't it? So that's fine. Let's do that. Let's do this. Yeah.
Okay, Andy, you'll send out a Teams invite to everybody then. Yes. Thank you. Right, that's probably our longest discussion for some time on an issue. So are we happy to move on? Thanks to everybody for your contributions then, and let's try and get this resolved. So I think we're on the next exciting subject of early years funding, which again we've had many forum discussions over. So Tim, do you want to take us through that, please?
Okay, so alongside getting the DSG information for the mainstream schools and for high needs, similarly just before Christmas we get the final information for early years. So the first part of the paper, because we get the early years money is distributed on an hourly rate. That's the kind of how it's sort of distributed. So if we look at the hourly rates that we've had for the last 5 or 6 years, you can see there was a jump in 2017-18, so it went up fairly significantly that year. Then it didn't go up at all for 2 years, and then for a couple of years after that, it sort of crept up. So being a slightly odd pattern of funding, but compared to schools and high needs, the thing that does strike you about early years is the very modest increases that have taken place in recent years. Now there's a bit more money going in 22-23, so it's going up by about 3.8%, and in terms of the funding rate, that means the 3 and 4 year old funding rate goes up 17p from £4.50 to £4.67, and the 2 year old funding rate goes up 21p, £5.36 to £5.57. In addition to that, we get a bit of money if you've got nursery schools. As recognition of the additional cost of running a nursery school, so we have 2, so we get some money for that. For a number of years now, there's been something of a cloud of uncertainty around the long-term future of nursery schools, because the government hasn't committed to continuing this funding into the future. It tends to be a 1-year settlement, and this is continued. So there still doesn't appear to be a firm DFE view on this, but for the moment, for 22-23 at least, the funding continues. A similar increase per capita for nursery school funding as well, 3.5%. We mentioned in the schools paper the supplementary grant, and you recall it's quite substantial amounts of money for schools in high needs. So for Telford, £4 million for the mainstream schools, it's about 2.8%, and for high needs, another £1 million from the £30 million budget. Slightly different for early years. So I've quoted in the paper a bit of the DFE's document. And it says that the additional funding for mainstream school provision for pupils aged 5 to 16 is provided in respect of both the health and social care levy and wider cost pressures. This means that the funding rates in the school supplementary grant are higher for 5 to 16 provision than early years or post 16. So what the government appears to be saying is the increase for early years is just meant to pay for the employer's NI increase and nothing else. Whereas the money that's gone into 5 to 16 provision is meant to pay for wider cost pressures. And I've left my comment as brief, but I've tried to make a few points, which is there's no rationale provided for this. So to put it bluntly, why is it the case that there's wider cost pressures for 5 to 16-year-old education and not wider cost pressures for post-16 or pre-reception? And the answer is clearly there are wider cost pressures. The DFE has just decided not to fund them. So I say that from an early years sector point of view that, again, perhaps not the greatest result in terms of comparing early years funding with other parts of the education system. And the other point to make is that because this supplementary grant applies to schools, there's nothing for PVIs. Now, in the context, there's an awful lot going in to early years. There's not a huge distinction between PVIs and schools. But as the DFE has insisted local authorities have a consistent funding formula for the sectors for many years, it's a bit rich for their own grant to then make a distinction between the sectors, it seems to me. Only my view on this, of course. I don't want you to feel this is an official view in anything. But anyway, we'll move on from that. So just to go on to the overall rules, which still say that we've got to pass at least 95% of early years funding to providers. We traditionally exceed that quite substantially. We're up to about 98%, and that will be the case for 22-23 in terms of what we're proposing. We can't distribute more than 10% of the funding formula through supplements, so at least 90% has to go in the base rate. Obviously, we do that as well. There is also a disability access funding, which is also increased, and there's been an increase in the early years pupil premium grant amount as well. So in terms of that, in terms of proposals, what we're going to do, we intend to pass on the increase in the hourly rate intact to settings through the base rate. So 2-year-olds 21p higher to match what we get in, 3 and 4-year-olds 17p higher. The slight sting in the tail is that we have to reduce the rates for flexibility and deprivation. And the main reason for that is, although the rate of deprivation is going down, we will actually be distributing more cash 22-23 because we've got more children as registering as eligible. Now, that's probably, it's difficult to prove this, that's probably because of 2 things. 1, a genuine increase in deprivation, and 2, because settings probably are now getting more children registered as eligible. Because a couple of years ago, we moved away from funding deprivation based on IDACI, which is postcodes, so settings didn't have to do anything. The money just flowed based on the children's home addresses, to a system whereby we fund it based on eligibility for free school meals. So that's placed the onus on people actually registering as eligible. And obviously in early years there are no free school meals, so it removes that sort of incentive from parents, a bit like in Key Stage 1 in schools now. Remember that had an impact as well when universal infant free school meals came in. So we think that what's going is a combination of a kind of a genuine demographic change plus settings sort of getting people registered. So say the result is the rate's going down, the actual amount of cash being distributed is actually going up. And that's the background to that, and the flexibility both having to be depressed so that we've got enough cash to pay for these things. Going on from that, the lump sum to nursery schools, again, we simply propose to pass on the money we get in. Then we get to central retentions, which we've talked about at length with the 4 previous years. So the proposal for those is to leave everything unchanged. So that's in cash terms, not in sort of proportions or real terms. So all the central retention would be in cash terms the same as previous years. So obviously any inflationary pressures just have to get absorbed. So going back to the Dfe requirements, the requirement is we pass on 95% of the funding to settings. As I said, we're normally well above that, mainly because other authorities retain more of the money centrally than we do. We retain a relatively modest amount compared to our peers, so we'll be above 98%. And the thrust of the proposals really is we want to try and pass on the extra money we get intact settings as much as we possibly can. Thus, we've increased the base rates to match the government's increased the funding to us. Right, that's it. I'll pause there for any comments or questions.
Right, it'd be nice to deal with this one quite quickly if we can, because we have talked about early years a lot. So comments, questions, Rachel?
I think you're muted, Rachel.
Doing that. I just wondered, a quick question, whose decision was it to take it from a DACI to free school meals? Because that's such a pain, isn't it? Because it's obviously was it a financial gain? Was it the DFE that made that decision? I just wondered who made that decision.
It was the LA. I think it was 2 years ago, and we talked about it. We have an early years finance group which met this week a couple of days ago, and a couple of years ago when we did this change, we talked about it with the early years finance group. I remember also talking to the forum about it. The decision on the actual funding formula is an LA decision, so ultimately it's down to us. The DFE basically allow us to distribute deprivation using a number of indicators. DACI is one of them, free school meals another one. Part of the background, I mean, I'm sort of trying to remember the discussion here, but part of the background was sort of consistency discussion, because we felt that most of the funding going to schools was based on eligible free school meals, either via the people premium or the funding formula. So we thought it was better for a consistent point of view to switch that route for early years as well. I think at the time the contrary view was probably mainly around what you just alluded to there, Rachel, which is the sort of administrative burden for settings, because the advantage with IDACI is you just read off a postcode. Yeah. There's nothing, no requirement to actually, get anyone to register for anything.
That's the issue, isn't it? Is getting people to register, because there's no incentive for them to do that. It's good for us as a setting, but not necessary for them. So IDACI was, in my opinion, better. But okay, thank you for that clarification, Tim.
Thanks, Rachel. Penny, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, that was a big change for settings. Settings lost quite a bit of money on that when the deprivation changed, and they weren't necessarily happy about it, because trying to get the parents to fill in the paperwork is an absolute nightmare, and we don't have the luxury of having administrators and things like that. So it's the staff that should be spending time with the children that are chasing parents constantly to fill in the paperwork. Yeah. So especially PVI settings, we do miss out quite a lot on deprivation.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and it is a nightmare. I agree with you. Getting parents, even in our own, mainstream setting, it's a nightmare. And I think only through COVID we've managed to get more parents to fill in the documents, because it's helped as the children have moved through school.
I think it's maybe something we should pick up again then, Penny, particularly because I know you're on the early years finance group, that we should pick up again for future years, because we've now done this for a couple of years at least. So maybe it's time to take stock and take a look at whether in the round we think the change was positive or not.
Yeah, taking Rachel's point, IDACI really gave you that nailed on postcode information, whereas free school meals is it's not under our control, is it? It's a difficult one. Andy, you're waving at me.
Yeah, one of the reasons we moved away from IDACI was the fact it was about 5 years out of date. So when we were actually trying to match pupils to postcards, a lot of the postcards weren't actually in the data that we were actually using.
Right. Okay.
So, you know, using actual free school meal information, you've actually got the pupils that are in the setting getting the funding rather than some notional pupil that might have been in that postcode 10 years ago.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I take your point. I know you won't want to do this. It'd be a really interesting exercise, wouldn't it, to compare the IDACI figure costs, what the IDACI data would give in terms of funding as compared to the free school meals. I don't know if that's an easy piece of work to do or not. And
I think we did do it at the time. I think Mandy might sort of consider it, but I think IDACI tends to spread the funding out in slightly more evenly. So all settings would get a certain level, and then it would be a fairly gentle rise up to settings getting more. Whereas with the free school meal data, I think there's more of a disparity between some settings getting very little and some settings getting quite a lot. I think that was the distributional impact.
Okay.
But I think we also have problems with families. So for me, in two of my settings where I've got ethnicity, it's those families understanding, filling in that paperwork and actually having that information for them to fill in.
Yeah. No, I understand. Perhaps, Tim, we can have another look at this if that's what forum members just to do a piece of work ready for next year, so we can have a look at the formula again. Members happy with that? Yeah, because most of us have all got nurseries, haven't we? So yeah, it does impact on us. Okay, we don't need to take a vote on any of this, do we? We've just had a discussion on it, Tim.
We express a view, and I think, Andy, am I correct in thinking that the part of this is subject to vote, or is it all sort of an expression of view?
And anything that's anything that's held centrally has to be approved by the forum. So everyone gets a vote except for post 16.
Yeah, okay. So the bit you're voting on is the central retentions. So the funding formula itself is an LA decision. We consult with you in the early years sector. But if we have to retain any money and it doesn't pass through to settings, then as well as the 95%, because we easily pass that threshold, we also have to have a forum vote on anything that's held back. That's what Andy reminded me. So just to reiterate what that would be, it's the same cash amount as last year. And I say that because recall last year we did have considerable debate about this.
Yeah, because I think Simon met separately to have that discussion with early years. So I'm proposing that we go to a vote on supporting that retention with the figures in Tim's paper. So all those in favour, would like to raise your hands, please. Yep, thank you, everybody. I think I've got that one through. Yep, that seems. Anybody want to? I don't know if you can do an abstention. I've never looked at it on here before. Anyway, that vote's carried looking at the numbers. So thank you, everybody, for that. Okay, so rapidly moving on. I think we're now at AOB. I don't have any AOB at this meeting. Tim, have you got anything?
Nothing for me.
Simon, have you got anything?
No, nothing for me, Jill. No.
Anything? Yvonne, you got your hand up? No. No, that was from the vote. Tom, your hand's still up. Get those hands down.
Sorry, Jill.
That's fine. Okay, so I think that concludes our business of today. Our next meeting is, Andy, remind me, March?
Yeah, March the 10th.
March 10th. We might meet face to face, you never know. We did have a discussion, didn't we, Tim, earlier in the week, that there's a couple of forum meetings. We might not need them all. We'll come back to.
Yeah, we normally tend to the things you actually vote on tend to take place at this meeting in November, and then in March and May they tend to be more information meetings. So sometimes there's enough going on that we think it's worth talking to you, but we don't want to sort of have one of these meetings just for the sake of it. So at the moment there'll be a meeting in March, because we do want to talk to you about high needs at some point. But we'll see it near the time whether it justifies a full meeting.
Thanks, Tim. Tom.
Yeah, it was just quickly to say, Jill, that with myself moving back to mainstream, I presume I'll be coming out of the forum.
You will.
But I just wanted to say, thank you for inviting me, and it's been really insightful to get to know how the process works. So thank you all. Thanks,
Tom. Yeah, Tom is moving on. We have a new head going into Kickstart, say in February. So all change, but all good change, and we'll have to look. And in Tim, I'm not sure that our new head will want to jump into the work of schools forum immediately.
Surely he will. Surely that was one of the things you dangled in front of him as a carrot to take the job.
It's a she.
Oh, she. Well, same applies, surely.
Yeah, we'll cross that bridge when we've got her in the building. Okay, so thank you everybody for your time. I hope the rest of your day goes well. That you knit yourself through the fog of what we're dealing with at the moment. But thank you for your contributions this morning. It's been really valuable. And apologies to Simon and Tim, we've got a little bit of work to do, but I think we'll get on the call next week and try and close this out. Okay, thank you everybody. Take care.